And welcome to JJ, the JJ Dillon podcast. I am your co-host, JP John Paz, and with me, as always, is the star of the show, two-time Hall of Famer, the leader of the Four Horsemen, the second greatest manager of all time, a former WWF and WCW executive, James J. Dillon. JJ, how are you doing this evening?
John, I'm doing great.
Yeah, absolutely. And this week on the show, we'll be Ask JJ Anything, where we'll be taking some questions that we've got either from Twitter or from email or from wherever we've gotten them from. Even got a phone call from an old friend of yours and got a question they wanted to send in. So, we got a bunch of random, just different questions from all over. I don't know if we'll get to all of them quite on this episode, but we'll get it to as many as we can. Are you ready, JJ?
I am ready, and we've had no preliminary discussion, no advance notice, which I like it that way. Just whatever it is, put the question out there, and I'll do my best to answer.
Now, I'm not sure if you remember him, hopefully you will, the old Jim Crockett promotion photographer, Eddie Cheslock, who's an old friend of yours. He sent in...
From Richmond.
Yes, exactly. Yep.
I remember him well. He's a good friend.
He wanted to know, what are your top 3 Four Horsemen and why, meaning group-wise. So his pick was Arn, Rick, obviously, Tully, and Ole. That's his favorite. His second favorite was Rick, Arn, Tully, and Luger. Then his third favorite was Rick, Arn, Tully, and Barry. So he's saying, basically, what are your top 3 groups that you had of the Four Horsemen?
Well, the original group, which he listed first, would be my choice as well. And the next would be actually the group with Barry. And beyond that, I don't start numbering him down. I mean, the group with Ole, if it hadn't have been for him, maybe the Horsemen, the thing would never have gotten off the ground, never going anywhere. So that is important. And even though Ole is basically retired and out of the limelight, he had a fantastic career. When I broke in with Jim Crockett Promotions back in the early 70s, Ole was basically a main event performer, and he and Gene because the Carolinas was predominantly a tag team territory, and he and Gene were one of the top tier teams, along with Rip Hulk and Sweet Hansen, and so I got to be around those guys as I broke in on the road, and again I started, and this is now, but you have to remember, this is before the internet, before cable television, and so being from Trenton, New Jersey, my understanding, other than just the newsletters weren't as prevalent back then, and you got the newsletter, which would kind of tell you what was going on through correspondence, mentioning, whatever the territory is, whether it was Detroit or Amarillo or in California. That way, was my way of knowing, who was appearing where, and what the hot feud was in that particular territory. So it was a different time, that's for sure.
Now, he also mentioned he loved the Luger group as well, and I know obviously Lex is near and dear to your heart as well.
Yeah, and Lex was the one guy that came along who the other Horsemen were all people who had lengthy careers, and Lex was in Florida. He was a football player, bodybuilder, and kind of got sideways in Florida with Bruiser Brody, and I remember Eddie Graham called Jim Crockett back then, and the situation in Florida was intolerable because there was, I guess, a cage match from what I remember with Luger, and it just it got out of hand, and Luger climbed on his own over the top rope, over the top of the cage, went down, went back to the dressing room, picked up his gear, and left the building. And so it's Luger's right from the get-go in the very beginning has been somewhat of a controversial figure, but he we did well with him as part of the Horsemen.
Got a question here from Billy M. via email. It said, what was it like to be under the learning tree of Eddie Graham in Florida?
Well, in the industry, we would hear people talk about who the great leaders were, and I kind of figured that. And Eddie Graham was kind of like the guru. He was the top guy who and at that time I remember Dr. Jerry Graham and Eddie Graham, the Graham brothers, being in the New York territory. In fact, I've got a copy of the original Wrestling Review magazine that came out in the fall of, I want to say, I'm looking at the date, 1959, and the cover was Dr. Jerry Graham and Eddie Graham. And Jerry was the flamboyant one, always with a cigar, and he did the one that did all the talking, and Eddie stood there, very stoic, and he never even said anything. And of course, later on, I found out, once I was on the inside of the business, how respected Eddie was, and that he was and is one of the most brilliant people ever behind the scenes. He was a great performer in the ring. He was I wrestled Eddie many, many times, which was a great privilege and honor to have been in the ring with him. But he was using some inside terms. He was salty. He was snug, and if he reached up, if you had him in a hammerlock or an armbar or something, and he reached up and got a handful of your hair, the back of your head, and was going to pull you down, if you were smart, you knew what the inevitable was going to be and didn't offer a lot of resistance, or you'd be eventually on the ground anyway, and Eddie'd be standing there with a handful of your hair. So, wow. Yeah, he was very physical. He wasn't dangerous in that he didn't, deliberately hurt people, but he just, he was tough. And he went all the way back to the early days with Dory Funk Sr. in Amarillo. He was a huge card. Eddie was in Amarillo. I think he wrestled in the name of Rip Rogers back in the day. And then Eddie became not only a student of the business, but regarded as a professor emeritus by anybody that was in the business that was ever around him. So I really look forward to my journey, and back in those days you would go from territory to territory, and Eddie settled in Florida, and I finally got to be there and to be around him. And when you talk about being under the Eddie Graham learning tree, that's what it was. He was just somebody that, and I've told the story in Tampa. The dressing room was up on the second floor, and there was as you came up the stairs was a door into the dressing room that the heels came out of, and you had to go around and along that railing to another door farther down that the baby faces would go in. However, there was a door on the inside where the one could access the other from the inside without the people in the arena seeing it. And I can think of more than one occasion where Eddie wasn't actually in the match, but I remember there was a tag match of 4 seasoned guys that was going to be an outstanding match, just with them putting their heads together to see what they would come up with. And there were these four guys that were in it, sitting around, with 4 folding chairs in like a circle, so that they could all make eye contact with each other and communicate. And as I look back at the scene, Eddie Graham was sitting on a separate chair, maybe 2-3 feet behind that group, but where he could, hear what they were saying. And they would go over and throw suggestions and list ideas, and just when they thought that they really had a great plan for that match that night, Eddie would just slide his chair a little closer, and he would say, "Boy, what you know." He always would start by saying that what they had put together at that point was going to be great, with no input from him. However, he something came to mind, and he said, "Think about this," and he would throw out one little thing, and that would generate another conversation to basically relook at what they had already done. In other words, he didn't want to dampen the enthusiasm and the creative ideas of the four guys that really put their heads together and came up with something that was really good, but with Eddie's input and changing a few things, it went from being really very good to being excellent. And that's what Eddie was so good at. And he basically took the ingredients of what they had come up with and then added some things to make it even better. And that was the essence of Eddie Graham.
Such a brilliant mind in the wrestling business. Billy also wrote by email, what was your favorite territory to work and why?
Well, Florida has to be right up at or near the top of my list. Because of the fact that I had a chance to be there under the Eddie Graham Learning Tree, and Eddie was actively wrestling at that time too. And I remember on Friday nights, Mike Graham was kind of growing creative on the creative side. And on Friday nights, they ran two towns. One was in Tallahassee in the northern part of the state of Florida by the Panhandle, and Fort Lauderdale was, down in close to Miami. Well, Mike Graham, I think, had a sweetheart down there, so that every Friday he was on the Fort Lauderdale card, and that left me basically going to Tallahassee every week, which was fine with me. And driving distance were about the same, and Fort Lauderdale probably had the potential of maybe drawing a little bit better, where you can make a little more money. But because I was going to Tallahassee every week, and Eddie kind of knew that Eddie got a hold of me and said that he wanted me to basically run that town. And he said, I think, you've earned the right to push yourself and to program yourself, because you're going to be there every week. And he said, and I want to help you with my experience, and that it would be, it would be a good learning experience for me and good for my reputation in the business to be able to have a town that basically I was running in the Florida territory. And Eddie, wanted to basically ensure that he had a lot of confidence in me, which was good for my self-confidence, and with his help every week. And then it got to the point where, the town was really, really doing well. And Eddie said, not that Eddie, he certainly didn't need to work and didn't want to be on the road all the time, but he finally said, I'd like to come up there and work a 3 or 4 week program with you, which, I would never have felt right asking him if he would consider doing that. And when he basically threw the idea out there and volunteered to do it, I mean, I was ecstatic. And so he came to the town, and for 4 weeks, we worked the program and just did incredible business. But that was the peak of me being under the Eddie Graham Learning Tree, and I got to see firsthand that everything that was said about him and his reputation in the business, it was all true. And then I don't think the things that were said about him did justice to really how brilliant he truly was. He was, of all the people in all of my years, over a half century being around the business, he was the one guy who had the greatest influence on me, and I'm just blessed that I was in Florida at a time where Eddie was still active and had a chance to be under the Eddie Graham learning tree.
Jason E. via email. JJ, who do you think embodies being a four horseman the most, both in and out of the ring?
I assume you're talking about the current roster of people?
No. He's saying the embodies being a four horseman. I don't know if he means who. I guess
all the horsemen back in the day.
Yeah, who's kind of. I guess that's what I'm kind of reading it as. Who embodies being that four horseman the most?
There'd be a lot of choices that I could make, and it wouldn't be fair to list them all and say, well, it's a tie with all of them. But certainly Flair has to be way up on that list. Barry Windham would certainly have to be way up on that list. But the one guy who I feel especially when he came up from the Pensacola and came into Charlotte, and his reputation preceded him, but he was not at that point a household name, and his reputation had not fully developed. But to me, I saw Arn Anderson at the stage where his talent was raw coming in, and that he rose to the occasion and had such an influence and an impact on the territory and on the legacy of the Four Horsemen. So as I look at all, and that's with all due respect to Flair and to Ole but to me, Arn, and now where he didn't get, I think, the proper kudos due him for what a great mind and a great in-ring general. That's all come to fruition too, that he now enjoys that reputation of being a great ring general and a great performer, and he's to me, he's right up there at the top of the list. And he's a good friend, and it's not only because of our friendship, but he's someone that I just have so much respect for. And there's other guys that were, had a little more experience that were, and he doesn't have the bodybuilding physique of a Lex Luger, or but he just, if you were looking at somebody that you were going to clone to be the epitome of a professional wrestler, and you wanted to bring their ring ability, their stamina, their ability to interview, go an hour if you needed an hour, or go out there and give you a hell of a match for 8 minutes if that's what it was called for, because you're on television limited at time. That to me, of all the people that I've been around, my kudos would go to Arn Anderson.
I was thinking the same exact thing. Now, Todd Stutz via email wrote, JJ, can you talk about the relationship the Four Horsemen had with their fans in Greensboro back in the day? I was a part of a small contingent of hardcore smart fans that were in Greensboro on a regular basis, and I've heard bits and pieces about how much all of you guys thought about those fans in Greensboro, North Carolina.
Yeah, we did, and actually, I think the television show on TBS out of Atlanta, where basically Arn coined the phrase of the Four Horsemen and held up the symbol of excellence, which was the four fingers with the thumb in the palm. And the day that he did that, and he did it almost as a passing thought. And I wish there was a copy of that interview, because I've gone over it a million times in my mind. But he talked about when the Horsemen were all standing there, and he said, no, at no time in our history have especially in the world of professional wrestling, have four individuals had an impact on the overall industry and dominated. And he said, and I would expand that beyond the world of professional wrestling, and to try and find a comparison, he said it would be the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse, and held up four fingers. And that's where the Four Horsemen thing started, and the use of the symbol of excellence. And when he I think did it for the first time on Atlanta TV, we would do Atlanta TV in the morning at the studio, and then jump on a plane or a charter to go to, because Saturday night was a major night for professional wrestling in live arenas. And on that particular night, we were in Greensboro, which was always a good town for us, period. I mean, and after Arn kind of established the identity of Four Horsemen, and we didn't really think that it would be something that we could not have ever imagined at that moment that by mentioning the name and the symbol of excellence as it came to be known was going to have that kind of an impact. But we went to Greensboro, and when we finally came out as a group into the ring, the one whole first row of ringside, the whole section, which would be probably 20 people wide, we're all there with shirts, ties, and when we got to the ring, people were looking everywhere else, and they were pointing that direction. And as we turned and looked, here that first entire row was holding up the four fingers with the symbol of excellence. And it gives me goosebumps even now thinking about it, that those fans, and then when others would see it, it spread like wildfire. That every town that we would go to, it would be similar, with fans holding up the symbol of excellence and yelling Four Horsemen, and we were heels. But and I'm sure Jimmy Crockett must have worried a little bit at first that, you want your fans angry and mad at your heels and want to see like the baby faces like the Rock and Roll Express or the Road Warriors, to draw the battle lines. But fans, yes, they deep inside hated us, but they loved to hate us and respect our ability and what we were all about. So we could go out there, and they still cheered the Road Warriors and the Rock and Roll Express and whoever, with the same energy as you could ever expect, and yet they would boo us, but still hold up the four fingers as symbol of excellence. And it was much a show of respect rather than admiration, though there some of that I think was mixed in there too. The bottom line is they love to hate us and bought tickets to come see us.
Love it. And if you think about it, what a memorable, obviously the Four Horsemen, but memorable fans down there in Greensboro. That is for sure. I mean, there's still a big contingent down there that absolutely love the old NWA, love Crockett, and absolutely love the Four Horsemen. Yeah,
they were great fans, very loyal fans, and one of the really true great towns that we would look forward to going to. Great fans.
This is from Subway Wrestling via Twitter. Do you have a favorite party story about going out with the Nature Boy Ric Flair?
Well, with the Nature, every night was an adventure. And Chicago was the one town in particular, and there was a gentleman. Rick always liked to hire a limo, and there was and I can't remember his name, and I wish I could, because he was an older gentleman. He was African American, and he I don't know if he actually owned the car or he was the driver of that particular car, and it was like he was our choice every week. That it was always him that would pick us up and then stay with us. And it's like the conversation every week would be, Mr. Flair, I can't stay up too late tonight. I've had a busy weekend. And please don't stay out all night. And Rick would say, no, don't worry about it. We're going to make it an early night tonight. Well,
yeah, right.
Rick didn't know the true definition of early night, and sometimes we would be on Rush Street in Chicago, and there was the bars changed names of the over a period of time as ownerships change over a period of time. But there was one place there. I think it was called the Snuggery, and that was our watering hole. And of course, Flair or one of us would mention, in Chicago, and we're gonna come out there, and we're gonna destroy the arena. And when we're done, we're not going to rest. We're going down to Rush Street, and we'll see everybody at the Snuggery. Well, by the time we got down there in the limo, it would be wall-to-wall people. And, it was like 2 floors. And so they had a pretty good capacity, but they would have the fire marshal capacity met, and there would be a line of people down the street and around the corner that if a couple people left, then they would allow 2 people in to take their place. And it just, I really can't think of another town that was, or another look in the watering hole that we went to that was as hot as Snuggery. It was just, and you'd walk in, and they knew what each of us, what our drink of the night of choice was, and you walk in, and you go to tell the bartender what you want, and he'd put the drink down in front of you, and you'd smile. Okay, they know what we want, and then we would be there the whole night. And at the end of the night, we didn't take anything for granted. We say, well, okay, where's our tab? And the answer was always the same. You don't have a tab. Either somebody or some group picked it up, that it was a good night for the watering hole, certainly a good night for us, and the fans that were there were able to get in, just enjoyed being able to rub elbows with us. And, they were always respectful, and just, God, great memories.
Rick, as big of a party animal as everyone thinks he is and how he proclaims, or is a little bit of, maybe like a little bit of a work?
I would go so far as to say, whatever rumors that you've heard, or stories that you've heard, or you may have witnessed, if you were in a town where we were there, they weren't exaggerated. If anything, they were toned down in what some of the stories were. It just, I used to say, I don't know when Rick sleeps. And here's a guy who it wasn't like the nightlife became his life to the expense of his in-ring performance. His in-ring performance never wavered, no matter how long he was active, how long he was a champion, which I think is why he will go down as one of the greatest, if not the greatest champion of all time, because he would go out there every night, and he knew that the fans came with expectations. And even if we went to a smaller town, or went to a town that normally would do real well, and for some reason, maybe the television got preempted that week and didn't air, and so the crowd may have been 2/3 of what we thought it would be, that didn't affect Rick's performance. He came out every night, and just as if the place was full to the rafters, and there was standing room only, and people turned away, which is why Rick will go down as one of the greatest, if not the greatest champion of all time, because that was his work ethic. And even if he was hurt, if he was tired, it didn't matter. It's like he would get to the arena. You could, when the Horsemen were there, you could feel the energy. The energy was there, and when you walk through that curtain, it's something that it's either there or it's not, and it was always there for us. And I think that a part of it was that we realized that the fans anointed us. They made the Horsemen, and in so doing, they also, no matter what town you went to, what the circumstances were, they had an expectation of what they were going to get when you came through that curtain. And we were aware of that, no matter what town we were in. If the crowd was a little bit down because the TV was preemptive, we went out there for the people that were there, and more nights than not, it was standing room only. We went out there and performed at our max, at the highest level. Didn't matter if we were tired, if we had a double shot that day, because back then we were going 7 days a week with 2 days on a Saturday, and a lot of times 2 days on a Sunday. That we were appearing in an arena 9 times in 7 days, and there would be weeks go by that we didn't have a day off, and the family sometimes would, but the financial rewards were very good too. But after a while, they gotta be nice if we can have you at home for one night. But as a performer, if you ever get to a situation like that where, and this is what the Horsemen experienced, where we were so hot that yes, you're pushing you're pushing yourself to the limit, but at the same time, you hope that because some people go their whole career and dream of being in a situation like that and have a successful career, but never get to experience what we experienced. And we never lost the fact that that's a situation that we were in. And so we pushed ourselves to go out there and push it to the limit every night, because we knew that those fans spent their hard-earned money, come to see us with the highest expectations, and we weren't going to let them down, which is, I think, why we were so successful.
Next question from Christopher Sapp via Twitter. Who was Lisa Wolfe, and why was she working for the WWF in the mid-90s?
Lisa Wolfe. I'm trying to think back. She had 2 brothers that were active in the National Football League in management positions, and how she came to be involved with wrestling, I don't know. But there was a period of time there where, she was on the road with us, and she was, it was. I'm sure people had their rumors as to what they thought was going on, but she was a great businesswoman and a good person to be around, and I think kept us on the straight and narrow. And I really enjoyed the time that we had with Lisa, and she was good people.
What was her role? I know she did, obviously Vince got her from the National Football League. What was her role in the WWF?
I don't. Back then, nobody was big on titles and job descriptions. But she went on the road with us, and she enjoyed being around us. It's a crazy world, and I'm sure being around the National Football League and football players, there are people that have a lot of great memories. And she found that the world of professional wrestling and being around the Four Horsemen was everything that you could have heard about the NFL and their legion of fans and what they did. And we didn't take a back seat to anybody.
Now, when she was working WWF in the mid-90s, what was like her, not position or title or something like that, but what was her like place in the pecking order? Obviously not as high as Vince, but she was above you, below you. Did she report to you, or you reported to her?
Technically, I think I reported to her, and she was, Vince had kind of, because Vince can't be everywhere every night in every town, and she was going to towns and was a good businesswoman. And I don't remember what her exact title was. and for the period of time that she was there, and I don't even remember what that total time frame was, but she was a great businesswoman, and she was no nonsense, and was good for us for the time that she was there, and good as a person.
This is from Chad B via Twitter. JJ, do you watch current wrestling at all? Have you seen AEW? If so, what do you think of it?
Wow, to be honest with you, I don't watch much of the current product. If back in the day, it's like 605. They talked about everybody which was understandable, would have their whole Saturday with all the places they had to go and errands they had to run, but they always managed to be home in front of their television set when Championship Wrestling came on at 6:05, and that's how the day was structured. They may week to week may be different, but at 6:05 they were home in front of their television set. And wrestling fans are incredibly loyal, and that period of time the ratings were just unbelievable. The Horsemen were, I would say, at their peak. We also had people across the ring from us, be it Dusty Rhodes, the Road Warriors, Sting, we had people across the ring from us that were worthy of the Rock and Roll Express, because we were hot, but people don't come just to see you have your ring entrance and stand there in the corner. They want to see a contest, and they want to see people that are worthy of giving you a battle every night. And the depth of the talent roster at that time was, I think, as good as it's ever been.
Have you seen AEW, the Cody Rhodes new promotion that they have?
I have come across it a few times and watched some of it, and it kind of reminds me of back the old days with what we were doing in the studio wrestling, and it seems to be structured similarly. But I was close to Dusty. We never interacted anywhere around the arena because he was the catalyst of all the people that we were fighting, and I was kind of the leader on our side. And so Dusty and I, as close as we were, really never associated, except we would make exceptions around the holidays, and Dusty would have a party at his house, and I would be invited, but it was an era where you hear the term "protect the business," which we tried to do, and we never back in those days, if you, like in Amarillo, not that many restaurants in Amarillo, but if you walked into a restaurant and looked up and saw one of the top baby faces at a table, there was a time where you could maybe go over to the far end in the same restaurant, the same time we were there, and have no communication with them. But there were fans that had trouble accepting that, because the battles between the two sides were so intense that they had a hard time accepting that the two of us could be even in the same restaurant without all of a sudden tables flying and it ended up a fight. So rather than be in a situation like that where the fans would have pause, if they were there or somebody was there and I walked in and saw them, I would turn around and go somewhere else. And it's amazing how fans notice the little things like that too.
As far as Cody, I don't know how well you know him or don't know him. Any like anytime you met him or anything like that? And did he remind you of Dusty at all as far as kind of his plans and thoughts of what he's doing with the business? Because obviously he's kind of playing the same role, so to speak, as Dusty. He's kind of the big baby face for AEW. He is one of the bookers behind the scenes, so it's very reminiscent of Dusty.
Well, I watched him grow up from a young pup, because I would socialize some with Dusty, not to the point that people would see me come and going at his home, and so over a period of time, I got to see all of the fans. He had a daughter too that was a cheerleader for, I think, one of the NFL teams, and they just. So I watched Cody grow up from being a young pup, and so it doesn't surprise me that Dusty's DNA is going through the veins of Cody, and I would be surprised if he wasn't everything that they're now are saying that he is, because Dusty was a great performer, but he was also an incredible mind for the business, and that just tells me that during those formative years, that Cody saw that and was absorbing some of that and remembered enough of it that now that's coming into play with what he's doing, carving his own niche and making a name for himself. I am not surprised at all.
So one of those things where you're pretty proud, since you're obviously very close with Dusty, or was very close to Dusty, very close to Sammy. Some of you are very proud. You're hoping that he succeeds with AEW and his actual competition events.
Absolutely. I loved Dusty, and in our business, for one man to say that he loved another man, people, yeah, I loved Dusty, and Dusty loved me, and when we were the few rare times where we could be together somewhere and interact, it would be a big hug, and I, who would say it first, but I'd whisper in his ear, "I love you, Dream," and he would say he loved me, or he would get it out first, and it was a genuine show of respect and something that goes much deeper. Just kind of like the brother that you never had, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Now, let's see here. From Carl via email. You mentioned having over 3,000 matches in your career. Who was your favorite opponent? Do you even have a favorite opponent? Or maybe do you have some favorite opponents and favorite matches?
Wow. Of 3,200, I in the time that over a 20-year period, got to wrestle in Madison Square Garden. It was a big deal for me. Spent a year in Australia, like 15 tours of Japan. I think I wrestled actually because I used to keep records for taxes, and I would be able to note at the end of the year where my travels would take me. And I think I wrestled in 44 of the states. I wrestled in Germany, so I got to see a lot of the who's who. I mean, I went to Germany, and Otto Wanz was their world champion over there, and I got a chance to wrestle him. And it was a different style over there. Punching was very commonplace here in the States, even in Japan, but it was a no-no in Germany. I mean, you were told. I know that that's what you do but here, if you can't have a match without punching, then, we would have to turn around and conclude our relationship and have you go back home. But it's if you know that those are the ground rules, it's surprising about what great matches you can have without ever throwing a punch.
That's great. And now, as far as, let's see here, Randy H. via email, this is a good one. As head of talent relations in the WWF, who was your favorite talent to work with, and who was your least favorite talent?
for those that know me personally, outside of the ring, will know me as someone who has a personality that I think I could virtually get along with anybody. And for that reason, I had great success on the creative and executive side of the business because I had that ability to be able to get along with with all people. And for me, I can't, to start picking out names of somebody that maybe was difficult to deal with. I can't single them out because I figured a way how to make it work. And, there were always guys that were easy to work with. I remember one time that we used to have to do when I was in WCW, where, or it might have been when I was working for Vince, that we had a lot of, I think it was working for Vince, where we had a lot of personal appearances with different sponsorships. And even though guys got paid to do them, there was a lot of guys who, had a pretty extensive schedule in terms of as an in-ring talent. And even though that they can make good money doing personal appearances, preferred to not beat themselves to death and have time home with their family. And I certainly respect that. And I remember that, and I'm not picking on Lex Luger, but it seemed like every time that I called Lex, it was like I'd hear almost a groan through the phone, and I had my 5-year-old has a birthday party this week. It was always something that was not convenient for him. The other end of the spectrum was Randy Savage. I mean, I didn't even get I would call Randy, and the Macho Man would say, "Well, what do you got? Where do you need me to go?" Knowing that I didn't send him just to send him somewhere. They were all important, and they were different sponsors and different things that to have Randy was a big deal. And Randy would go, and without a moment's hesitation, almost to the point that someone in that position of having to make calls to guys and ask them to give up a day off to go somewhere, you'd almost like be motivated to call a Randy Savage, because Randy always said, "Where do you need me to go?" And and you get me a nice hotel and whatever, and the car to pick him up, and I sound like I'm picking on Lex, but some guys that would like, "Oh man, again," but in fairness to Randy, though, to call somebody else who didn't have the same enthusiasm that Randy did, it would have been unfair of me to say, "Okay, I'm just going to call Randy because Randy just wants the information, and he's going to go, and I don't have to hear any attitude." Where there's another guy who I'm going to have to listen to some attitude, and then not back down, and tell him, "Well, your name came up, and you're on the, like they had the games that were very popular then, and you're one of the featured guys, and you're on the cover of the box of the game, and this is to promote that, and I need for you to go." And I had to be stern and hold my ground too.
I love that. Macho Man, you think, such a big star, this absolute legend. You figure he might be like, "Yeah, I don't know about that." You figure he wouldn't be as easy to work with as he really was. Kind of surprised.
He was a huge star, probably one of the biggest stars ever in our profession. And I had a great relationship with Randy. And I in good conscience can say I never abused it, but Randy was also in demand. He was making good money. He was on all of the games. He was on the cover box. if they released a DVD back then, like if they had, the different things, whether it was WrestleMania or what, it was a big deal.
VHS tapes and stuff.
The VHS tape was a big market back then, and so the guys who were being featured to actually promote it during the release time, it put some pressure on the guys, but they were also the guys that were being rewarded financially for it too.
That's just from Mike T via email. Jim Ross has often said you helped him greatly for what would be his role as head of talent relations in the WWF. Can you kind of elaborate on maybe you giving Jim some pointers or helping him out, or maybe just giving him some advice?
Jim was a student of the business as far back as I can ever remember. He worked for Bill Watts, and back in those days, Bill's territory was pretty widespread. And Jim has a unique talent in that he is very good at broadcasting and calling matches, and so he's somebody that was always in demand. And I have so much respect for Jim Ross. He's a great announcer, and nobody could ever question his passion for the business, and just he was always professional. I think that is, if I had to pick one word to describe or two words to describe Jim Ross, a consummate professional, and that's what he was. And I always had a great relationship with him, great respect for him, and just somebody that will be a friend for life.
Is that something you had to help him kind of prepare for that role, or is it one of those things where you can just give him advice and you kind of got to learn it yourself? Or how does that head of talent relations work as far as the next guy stepping in?
Well, like I said, Jim was a student of the business. He was around Bill Watts, so he learned a lot from Bill before I ever worked with him for a sustained period of time. So he had already developed good habits and understanding of what you had to do to be a success in this business, and especially somebody who was a commentator, broadcaster. There's added pressures on them with what the expectations were. So and Jim would be there because I would go to towns, and he would see my interaction with the guys, and I never ever thought, I mean, I'm just hearing this from you, and I never thought, well, God, I never thought that Jim Ross is one of the absolute best at what he does, and I'm humiliated and humbled and surprised that maybe I had a role in formulating him being in that role as his career developed.
Yeah, and I believe he said it a few times. And I know this was probably a couple years back. There was a live stage show. You were kind of brought out as a special guest, and he really gave you a lot of kudos, saying you have a huge help to him in the business for sure.
I remember that, and it was the introduction that he gave me, and I'm someone who I've never taken my success for granted. I always have said that I was never the biggest, never the best, but nobody loved this business more than I did or was willing to work any harder than I worked. So whatever success I've had is because I worked at it. But there are a lot of people who work at it and feel that they've earned something that just, and that's the crazy part of the business, that just never happens for them. And fortunately for me, it has happened. And I would say, part of my success was being around people like Jim Ross.
And I guess that would be a great kind of stopping point